Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. Thanks so much for being here. We're excited to convene everyone today. This is a panel discussion about strengthening relationships between nonprofits and foundations. And I am Dusty Ann North, and I am the lead instructor for the UC Berkeley Extension Professional Program in Fundraising and Volunteer Management, which is a 30-hour professional development program for nonprofit staff. We also get some higher ed staff. We also get some even public organization staff these days, because these days even public institutions have to do some fundraising. And it's a wonderful course. It's aimed at two levels of support. One is professional development for anyone who works in social services, environmental organizations, any kind of nonprofit setting or public setting, to build your skills in managing volunteers and in development and fundraising. And it's also considered to be sort of capacity building for organizations, because you have to be a staff of a nonprofit, or you can adopt a nonprofit if you're not full-time with a nonprofit, to take the course, and you have to get approval from your organization to be part of the course. And so it's a way to meet organizations and professionals where you're at and help you further your development and volunteer engagement work in a variety of ways. So it's a 30-hour course with wonderful guest faculty who are all current practitioners in the field, either in development or in volunteer management or both. We learn a ton of hands-on skills. There's an advisor component to the program, where every student gets matched with an advisor to help them, and every student completes a project that is a concrete product of value to the organization. So it's a really wonderful, comprehensive course. If you haven't heard of us before, I hope you'll think about taking the course. And this session is just one piece of the course. We always do a panel with some foundation officers so that we can kind of hear the latest on what's going on in the foundation world, and really focus in on how nonprofits can build really good relationships with foundations, and how they can make proposals that will get funded, et cetera. So before we dive in, I want to do a couple of acknowledgements here. Sorry, my screen is doing weird things, which is often the case on these. So first of all, I would like to warmly thank the Bernard E. and Alba Witkin Charitable Foundation, and especially Kenneth Gutschman, for his continued support of our program. They offer scholarships for this program every year, and have also made this event possible. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, who will then introduce our wonderful panelists for today. So Carollo Aparicio is one of our esteemed faculty in our course, and has been with us since we started in 2016. And he currently is the annual giving officer at the San Francisco Foundation. He's also on our advisory board for the course, and always serves as an advisor as well for students. So Carollo has always been a really wonderful supporter of everything we're doing here. Um, he's got lots of certifications in related to development and fundraising. Before he was at the San Francisco Foundation, he led fundraising efforts at all different kinds of organizations like Grid Alternatives, the Sierra Club, Global Fund for Women, EcoViva, and International Rivers. He earned his master's degree in anthropology from Vanderbilt University, and an MBA from San Francisco State, which is also where he got his BA. And he's a certified fundraising executive, and a frequent invited lecturer and workshop facilitator on fund development and nonprofit management. So I'm excited to turn it over to Carollo, who will tell you about our other guests today. And thanks you all for being here. It's exciting to see this going forward. Welcome, Carollo, and our panelists.
Thank you so much, Dastian. Thank you for the warm introduction. I appreciate your kind words. Yeah, and thanks for this invitation and this opportunity to share a little bit about some experiences around fostering positive relationships with between nonprofit organizations and institutional donors, foundations. So with me today in this conversation, I have one of my colleagues from the San Francisco Foundation, Savannah Ray, and Jen Bowden from IGS. with whom I developed a really close working relationship when I was at Grid Alternatives. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So let me introduce Jen Bowden first. So Jen Bowden is the Vice President and Marketing and Social Impact for IGS Energy, where she's responsible for investments in communities where IGS does business, including philanthropic investments, employee community engagement, community economic development, and volunteerism. Before joining IGS, she was the vice president of community relations for the Columbus Blue Jackets, which is Columbus, Ohio's professional hockey team. She also served as the director of corporate and government relations and capital manager for the Mid-Ohio Food Bank. She has a degree in international studies from the Ohio State University, and she serves on the board of directors of Conscious Capitalism Columbus and on the committee for the Human Rights Campaign. And as I mentioned before, and in the spirit of full disclosure, Jen and I had a really great working relationship when I worked at Grid Alternatives, which is a nonprofit that's dedicated to building community-powered solutions to advance economic and environmental justice through renewable energy. Grid Alternatives and IGS Energy continue to have a really great partnership to promote clean energy, and we'll dive into that a little bit more in our conversation. I also want to introduce my colleague, Savannah Ray. Savannah Ray is the Senior Program Associate for the Chief Impact Officer at the San Francisco Foundation. The San Francisco Foundation is one of the country's largest community foundations with $1.7 billion in assets. And the foundation granted just over $171 million last fiscal year. Savannah has worked with the San Francisco Foundation for nearly 3 years, where she supports the Chief Impact Officer in building trust and cohesion across the foundation's diverse but interconnected grant-making teams. Before working at the San Francisco Foundation, Savannah worked for 5 years as the program evaluator at a firm called Social Policy Research Associates in Oakland, California. SPR worked as an external evaluator for philanthropic and government clients to help them assess and improve their impact for their programs for social good. Savannah is an alum of UC Berkeley, where she received her BA in psychology. So I want to welcome the both of you to this conversation, and thank you both so much for participating with us. I know that both of you are very busy people and have a lot of responsibilities, and I just want to express my gratitude to you for taking the time to have this conversation with us. So let's see. Why don't we start with kind of a background question, and I'm going to let's start in alphabetical order. Jen, can you tell us in broad terms about the foundation, or about the corporate foundation that you work for, the company that you work for, and tell us a little bit about them, and what are their priorities, and what sort of change are you striving to make in your community and in the world in general?
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here. So as Carlo mentioned, for a company called IGS Energy, we are a company that's been around for about 35 years, but it's as like the energy industry in general, we are evolving every day. And so we started actually as a natural gas supplier, but have evolved now to a company that's really trying to lead the transformation to a green energy economy. And so that's in part what we do. We have a company purpose to build a sustainable energy future for a healthier planet. And really from that purpose, our philanthropic work is cascaded and aligned. And so as we think about our goals and what we sort of the change we seek to make in the world, what we're really trying to do is make sure that that transition is equitable and just, and is accessible for all. So right now, today, what we've established as our goals from a philanthropy standpoint are really two primary outcomes. And those are that individuals from underrepresented backgrounds can attain skills and work in the solar industry. And then along with that, our secondary or kind of like our other outcome that we're working toward is to really install solar in communities that lack access to reliable, affordable, clean energy. And so that's what we've outlined as sort of the kind of the primary drivers of the work that we do philanthropically.
Thank you so much, Jen. Savannah, same question to you. Can you tell me a little bit in broad terms? Pretend we don't work with each other.
Yes.
Pretend I don't know anything about the San Francisco Foundation. Yeah, can you tell me in broad strokes what the San Francisco Foundation is about, and what the sort of priorities are, and what the change we seek to make, or your foundation seeks to make? Oh, we'll say
welcome
full
to
disclosure.
Okay. So yes, Corello and I work at the San Francisco Foundation, which is right across the Bay Bridge from UC Berkeley over in San Francisco. Though we are headquartered in San Francisco, we serve the 5-county Bay Area. And we are, I think as Corello mentioned, one of the largest community foundations in the United States. We're a 75-year-old organization, so we've been around for quite some time. And over time, we've definitely evolved our mission and our goals. But today, our North Star is racial equity and economic inclusion. The Bay Area is home to a lot of wealth. It is also home to a lot of inequality. And so as a community foundation, we're hoping to make impact in that inequality, to shrink that inequality a little bit. We believe that everyone in the Bay Area should have a chance to get a good job, live in a safe and affordable home, and have a strong political voice. And we do that mostly through our grant making, among other things, but we have kind of 4 separate grant making tracks. One is our people pathway. People is focusing on quality jobs. It's also focused on eliminating unjust fines and fees. So sometimes our society, we criminalize poverty, we fine people who are already in poverty. So that team is really looking at empowering workers and empowering low-income individuals. We also have our place team, which is working on housing, among many other things, but given the housing crisis in the Bay Area, that's a prominent theme of that team. We have our power team, which is working on creating a strong political voice, thinking about movement building, going beyond just issues, but how do we create a strong and sustainable movements? And we also have our policy and innovation team, which is thinking more in like a systems lens, thinking about policy on a regional and sometimes even state level to get to our North Star of racial equity and economic inclusion.
Thanks, Savannah. Savannah, I'm going to follow up with you with kind of a follow-up question. You used the term community foundation, and I mean, you and I both know what that is. We work for one, but there's a distinction between community foundations and other types of foundations. Can you shed a little bit of light on how community foundations maybe are a little different to, say, a private foundation?
Yeah, I learned this after coming to the San Francisco Foundation, and Corello, welcome any additional thoughts that you have. But so you have private foundations like the Gates Foundation, the Ford Foundation. If you listen to NPR and are in the Bay Area, you might have heard of the Heising Simons Foundation. So these are all private foundations, and they make grants from their charitable endowments. And their charitable endowments usually have a single major source of funding. So in often cases, it's a family or a single individual, or it could be a corporation. And for private foundations, it's usually the case that the family or the corporation set the direction of the foundation. And so you'll oftentimes see that as like the family will be on the board of directors of a private foundation. Community foundations, as I said, I'm learning, but they're a bit more complicated. So we too have an endowment that we make grants from. And community foundations are dedicated to improving life within a specific region. So we're usually more place-based than a private foundation, which can have like a larger geographic scope, although that's not always the case. Sometimes private foundations can be place-based too. But community foundations are always place-based. And in addition to the endowment, we also work with donors. So donors can set up donor advised funds or DAFs in our foundation. The donors that we work with can take advantage of the expertise of our staff, and they can give their pool to the causes that our staff, who have already done a lot of research and relationship building in the community, they can decide to fund, the things that we're already funding, or they can make their own decisions. And the idea, though, behind the community foundation is that donors and wealthy people in the Bay Area will have a greater impact if they can pool their resources. So rather than everyone just kind of doing their own separate grant making and charitable giving, if we're kind of pooling our knowledge and pooling our resources, we'll have a greater impact in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I think you totally hit the nail on the head from what my understanding of community foundations and how they work. And the really important thing there is that there's public support for the foundation, and the way that I think about it also is that it's not just in the hands of a few wealthy people, but rather, there's a sort of democratization of philanthropy. There's a great opportunity to be able to tap into the resources of a community foundation with for us, it's you can open a donor advised fund with $10,000, which, for some people it is a lot of money, but for a lot of people it's something that's attainable. So it really opens up a wealth of resources for a broader set of folks who want to learn more about philanthropy and participate more in philanthropy and in community. So thanks, Savannah. Jen, you work for a corporate foundation, and that is a little bit different. And so what I'm interested in learning a little bit more about, and you've already touched on this in your opening remarks, is what are your thoughts on building alignment between the corporate philanthropic side and the sort of business objectives of a corporation? How does that work? How does that enter into practice?
So I will explain how it works at my company at IGS Energy, but I will say I think that there's, like anything, there is a continuum of maturity and different ways of thinking about this kind of out there in the world when you look at all different corporate philanthropies and corporate foundations. But at ours, at IGS Energy, we really aim to be very aligned between the work that we do philanthropically and our business purpose. And part of the reason why we wanted to do this is because we feel that when we can apply our business expertise, the institutional knowledge of our people, sort of that skill-based look at solving problems in the world, we're going to have a greater impact. And so we've really worked to make sure that as we think about our corporate philanthropy, it is aligned to our corporate purpose, and it's serving as a complement to our business model. So there are places where our business is going to look at a market-driven approach and where we can go in and solve a problem and make a profit. Not that profit is the purpose, but there is a requirement in corporations.
You are accountable to shareholders. That's and that
right.
Sort of thing. Yep.
Exactly. But we also acknowledge that there are issues and challenges out in the world that connect to our business purpose that don't necessarily have a market based approach that's going to solve those problems. And that's what we view the role of philanthropy as being able to come in and do. So for us, where we are at right now, as I mentioned, is that's really looking at we can accelerate the rate at which we can upskill and bring people into the solar industry for jobs, training, and connecting them to career attainment. We can accelerate that through philanthropic partnerships with community action agencies, trade schools, other organizations like that. nonprofit partners. So within that workforce development focus we have. And then the other is in our pursuit of building a sustainable energy future, we recognize that we don't want to leave people behind. And so through our philanthropic efforts, we also work to connect communities that have been underserved or are underserved in getting access to reliable, clean energy. And so that's how we've looked at it. It's really making sure there's a strong alignment to our business purpose and a complement that can a complement to our business model that we can leverage kind of the learnings, the policy work that we're already doing as a business to make inroads in our social impact focus.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the conversations that you and I had when I was at Grid Alternatives, that one of the issues in business is finding qualified workers in the solar industry. And you're affecting change by helping organizations where that's their core competency. It's training people who come from marginalized communities or from people who want to break into the solar industry but hadn't known how to do it. And by strengthening these organizations, you're also serving the business purpose of being able to cultivate a new crop, if you will, of qualified employees. So I see how they work hand in hand.
It also allows us to look upstream a little bit further. So where the business may be looking for, like, if let's go with the workforce development, they may be looking for how we solve that problem today. From a philanthropic perspective, we can take a little bit of a longer view and work a little bit more upstream to try to solve that challenge.
Are we talking about policy issues with that?
Policy issues, or like one example is we're partnering with an organization in Central Ohio to build a solar specific training facility because none exist here. And so if this is just our talent acquisition team, they're not going to go out and necessarily make that investment to be able to hire solar installers today. But we can look upstream and say one of the challenges is that one of the barriers to finding employees is that there's just not the training or technical skill programs that exist. And so we have to invest in that. So I would say just, kind of looking 1 or 2 degrees above like the business problem today is one of the things that we're able to do from our philanthropic lens.
Great, thank you. So one of the issues that I want to raise in this conversation, and that I want to share with the folks who are participating and listening to our conversation, is I want to kind of demystify this sort of relationship between nonprofits that are doing the work and foundations that are also doing their work and helping support these efforts, and kind of demystify that and break it down and show that there's real people who were actually reading these proposals. That these are real people who are in relationship with you as a fundraiser and as a worker in your nonprofit. So I kind of want folks to get to know the two of you a little bit better, and your relationship to philanthropy. So Savannah, how did you get involved in philanthropy, and then how does that experience inform your approach to the work that you do?
So my background is in applied social science research. I worked in several different psychology labs while I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley. And when I graduated, I was really trying to marry like data and the power of research with solving social problems. So that's how I landed at Social Policy Research Associates in downtown Oakland. And that firm would get hired as a third-party evaluator for government and philanthropic clients who have some sort of program. They're trying to do good in the world, whether it's a government program or a program through a foundation. And they would just try and see what the impact of their program was. And so we'd be this third party that would come in and say, this is what you're doing really well. This is where you could maybe deepen your impact. So that's how I was introduced to philanthropy, was through this like programs evaluation side. And in terms of how it influences or informs how I do my job, today, I think I once a data nerd, always a data nerd. Like I feel like I'm always pushing us to be data
You're the coolest
driven.
nerd I've ever met.
Thank you. And yeah, I don't mean data just in terms of numbers either. I also mean it in terms of qualitative data. Like as a researcher, there was one project where I interviewed like 80 different program participants for one single project. So I have done so many interviews with folks that are like, for example, one of our projects was recipients of TANF, the temporary assistance for needy families. And so interviewing program participants to that. So I'm always thinking about storytelling, being data-driven, storytelling, lifting up voices that might be on the margins. And yeah, I think that just the being data-informed is something that I carry with me in this role.
Thanks, Savannah. What about you, Jen? I mean, you have an interesting CV and background. I mean, what was it that put you where you are today, and how does that experience inform how you approach your current role?
Yeah, so I started my career in fundraising actually. So I've been there. And
You get it, right?
yeah, I totally get it. And I think it was my own experiences of asking myself in working with corporate donors, foundations, and government grant makers that helped me shape like many of the approaches that we take today, in part because I saw that many of the things that we were asked to do or approaches we were asked to take, it seemed superfluous and redundant and or not useful. And so we've tried to really shape the approach that we take with our partners at IGS Energy in a way that feels like any partner we're working with understands the why behind what we're asking and how we operate. But yeah, that was my background. As I started as a fundraiser, I worked for a small grassroots literacy organization in Washington, D.C., and then did some work in the conservation space, working on one side of the Farm Bill. So if anyone's familiar with the Farm Bill, they understand that there's a bunch of, there's conservation and agriculture related work, but it's also the place where all of our food assistance support lives within this country. So from there, it was easy to make a transition over to the food bank. And so I spent time there as well.
Thanks so much, Jen. So shifting gears a little bit, between the two of you, you've no doubt read at least a few proposals. And in your experience, what makes for like a really strong proposal? I mean, from where you sit. Savannah, do you mind going first?
I was gonna say, can we go to Jen first? I feel like Jen probably has read more proposals and's been on both sides. And then I would love to add to whatever you start us off with.
Okay.
So I think that what makes a strong proposal is, first of all, truly understanding what the grant maker is looking for, and understanding when you may or may not be a fit. I think one of the things that often happens is we sort through a lot of grant proposals where people are not a fit to make it work. And that's just wasting everyone's time. So I think off the bat, looking for that solid alignment. And in part, some of that happens when you have real conversations with grant makers. So I would encourage folks to start there. The other thing that I think makes for strong proposals are a couple things. Being concise, finding a way to say what the point you're trying to get across in a way that is simple to understand, but isn't going on and on with anecdote or detail. And then finally, the other thing, and this kind of goes back to what Savannah was saying, is being data informed in your work. really trying to put objective information in there. There are going to be times where the work you're doing may not be fully fleshed out. There may be things that you're trying to figure out, and that's fine. But we read a lot of grant proposals that feel just very fluffy, and that doesn't move the needle for us. So, keeping the language tight, keeping it specific, calling out what still may be kind of, things that you have to figure out, but being data informed, I think, is a thing that we really look for.
I love that. I think, yeah, when you're reading a lot back to backs, you do get the sense sometimes that some of them feel fluffy. And I think that something that always kind of makes me pause a little bit, or when a grantee or a prospective grantee is being honest about the things that they're working on, that like, I'm like, oh, okay, like this is real. This is not just like copy paste. So +1 to that and everything else that you've said. I also find myself like really enjoying proposals where it feels like the author really understands the community that they're trying to serve, which is like, not like a concrete skill, but, or not like a checkbox that you can necessarily check, but I definitely, you can tell when like the person who's writing the grant really understands like the problem that they're trying to solve, or the problem that's facing a community. And then also kind of to your point, Jen, we have limited resources, and when a prospective grantee can make a clear case of why the resources are needed now in this moment, it's a very tricky thing, and we're kind of working in a hard environment where we do have finite resources. I wish there were infinite resources because there's so many good causes, but kind of making that sometimes time bound or a bit of urgency in a proposal can help.
All right, so we have a participant who raised the issue of wanting a little bit more precision in language. And what do we mean by fluffy?
So I think that's a great question. When I think about fluff, I think about going on and on about the organization's history in a way that isn't necessarily pertinent to the ask. I think about anecdotal stories. So there is a role for storytelling, but we get applications that are full of anecdotes and stories that don't actually speak to impact, for example, or collective impact. It's like an N of one, right? So for me, I guess this is probably more of an art than a science, but I think you have to look at all of your responses and say, does this really help the grant maker understand why our organization is best positioned to carry this forward? Not just, am I adding in things that I hope make them feel good about selecting this application?
Thank you. Savannah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have much to add to that. Yeah, just in a similar vein, I think when an organization is going on and on about their accomplishments, but they're not necessarily specifically related to the grant they're applying for, that feels like fluff, where, I don't know, you kind of just like, okay, I understand that you guys are doing good work, but you're kind of, when you're reading it, you're like, you're trying to find the place where it aligns. So that is what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking of fluff.
Thank you. So there's a lot of questions that are coming in, and I'm going to try to group some of them. And I feel like one of them has already been addressed by our comments. But we've got a question from a participant who asked if it's helpful for nonprofits to try to reach out and schedule some sort of a conversation before submitting a proposal, and also how important is it to build a relationship with you or with a program officer And if so, any pointers on how to accomplish that?
I can start with this one. So I will say it depends. You have some foundations out there that say like, we don't inquire with us, right? Like I just know they're out there from my own experience that say like, we don't want inquiries, just apply the application. At our, for us at IGS Energy, we invite that. So we have, periods where we launch our grant, and then we have Q&A sessions, and then we spend time with follow-up dialogue with potential grantees, because we want to really understand their work. And so I would say take your cue from the organization where you're applying. I will say, and I know, Carollo, you gave me a list of questions in advance, so this might be jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the things that is a reality, especially in the corporate grant making space, is we're typically seen as a cost center in the organization. So many people who are in corporate philanthropy roles wear a lot of hats and have very limited resources. And we often have a lot of, community organizations, nonprofit partners, where in the spirit of trying to like start a relationship, we're like, let's get together for coffee. Let's get together for lunch. Let's spend 30 minutes on a call that could have been a 5-minute email. And so I do think you have to be sensitive to the fact that the relationship building piece doesn't have to come just from like FaceTime. It can come from sort of the quality and the type of interactions that you have, and the authenticity of the interactions that you have, more so than just, well, let me try to just get in front of this person. So I would say, take your cues from the organization, but my suggestion would be always reach out and see if that's something that they have an appetite to do, but then respect and understand the fact that like meeting community organizations isn't probably all that's on their plate. And so find ways to be really precise and efficient with how you build relationships.
Great, thanks. And how about you, Savannah, from where you sit? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the 15-minute informational interview, where, both sides just tell each other what they're about, what our certain program is funding and what this organization can offer, and just kind of, but like Jen's saying, like not like an hour-long meeting, but usually, you can usually tell pretty quickly whether it's going to be a match. So I think a 15-minute informational interview is a good way to do that. I've seen that work really well for us at the San Francisco Foundation and our staff. Even if we're not a good fit for funding, sometimes we know other funders who may be a good fit. So we're really working with our staff to try and be helpful that way too, because we know it's painful when the answer is no after the informational interview. And then I think that it's also on as the community foundation, and we wear a lot of hats too, but probably less hats than the corporate foundation. But we're trying to be a little bit better too about being in community. And so like folks are able to get that FaceTime, not with just like a cold email or a cold call, but like, okay, let's make sure that our staff are going out to events and that they are available for organizations, and we have a presence in community, so it's not hard to find us. That's something that we're actively working on and doing a pretty good job of, I think.
So two themes that I heard emerging from both of your comments were authenticity, just being in community and having that be an authentic sort of communication. And the other theme that I heard was respect for everyone's time, and just how important that is, because that's a resource that we can't replace. So those were the takeaways that I got from your comments. Thank you. So partnerships with nonprofits. Can you comment a little bit about what in your experience makes for a successful partnership between your respective foundations and a nonprofit partner?
Savannah, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. One of the examples that comes to mind is the Sogorea Land Trust here in Oakland is one of our longtime partners of the foundation. They're Indigenous-led organization that's working on land back here in the Bay Area. And I think what's beautiful about our partnership with Segurite, though, far from perfect, and there's definitely things to work on in our partnership, but it does feel like partnership beyond just a grantor and a grantee. We have partnered with Segurite for our strategic planning efforts. Staff have volunteered at Segurite outside, through work, but, outside of just the one who holds the relationship, like other staff have done letter writing campaigns for Segurite. And that, in terms of like how to copy that relationship, it took a long time. Like trust takes a long time. And so knowing that, some of these deeper partnerships and deeper relationships can't be built overnight, but it is multiple touch points. Maybe it's a few no's before it's a yes, which I know is frustrating to hear and time intensive. What else do I want to say about Segurite and that partnership? I think, and there's a level of authenticity of them keeping it real with us and telling us when we've misstepped that I also appreciate about that relationship. But it has taken time to grow that. It has taken trust to grow that. And one of the things that we're, dealing with as a foundation right now is that we're a mostly invitation only foundation. We only have a few channels where grantees that we haven't already picked out can provide funding. And that's because we're trying to really build relationships with our grantee partners. And we know that that takes time and resources and effort. So that's a tension that I think we have as a foundation right now, is like being open and finding new grantee partners, but also wanting to really invest in the ones that we have relationships with now and have been kind of anchors in the community that would be very, very sad to see go in any capacity.
Thank you, Savannah.
That's great. I echo everything Savannah said. I think the other thing that I would add is, for us, I think our best partnerships are those where we are learning together. So I think this is a place where we really try to challenge the conventional power dynamic that's out there of like funder and grant partner, and really encourage that partner to feel like they're an equal to us in the fact that like they have the expertise, they're on the ground, they are doing the work that is helping us achieve our impact goals. The best relationships we find are those where we view it really as learning together. And so there's a willingness on the part of the nonprofit partner to talk about the challenges, the frustrations, the things that are not going as planned, so that we can understand. And then on our part, we also have to add, what do we not understand? Like, what do we as the funder not understand? What seems complex that we don't have the answer to, or we're trying to figure out how to make sense of work that's happening over here and over here. And so, I think that comes down to some vulnerability to help build that trust, but really thinking about it from a growth mindset standpoint of how are we learning together? And I know often there can be a little bit of a hesitancy on the nonprofit's part, and we can sense that as grant makers, are just like want to make people know when there seems like there's kind of this performative wall up of, oh, everything's great, and let me show you the bells and whistles and everything we do great. Those actually tend not to be our best partnerships. The ones that tend to be long lasting and most effective are the ones when our partners are coming to the table and really talking about the challenges that they're experiencing, because we all experience challenges. So that would be what I think makes some of the best partnerships.
That's really great to hear, because sometimes things happen between the proposal and the report, right? Like real life actually happens.
And it's great when you know in between versus when you get the report and then you find out everything went wrong and you're like, wait a minute, why are we just not learning about this now? It would have been awesome if we could have understood this like when you knew.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Savannah, did you have something to add about that? About
the
sort of thing about when things sometimes go a little bit different from proposal to report?
Yeah, I think that Jen, you nailed it. Like knowing earlier definitely helps. We had a situation where like we got a final report from a grantee partner, and then they were in the news because they were running into financial issues like 3 months later. And we were like, kind of had the parent, moment where we're like, well, why didn't they come to us? Like, why were they not comfortable sharing this with us? And so we had to do a little of reflecting on our end of like, what, environment are we creating where we can let these issues come up? But Jen, to your point, I think vulnerability is I don't think that it's something that we necessarily like know that we're looking for, but when we see it, it's definitely appreciated, and I think leads to the best relationships. And we know we're humans on the inside of this organization. We know that things go wrong. And so if your grant report is not exactly matching exactly what you set out in your, proposal, we understand that the work changes. And so I hope that folks feel comfortable in the relationships with their with foundations to be able to say that.
Thank you. So we've had a few other questions that have kind of bubbled up, and one of them is, and I broached the subject of reports and reporting, and you've talked about communication and keeping it authentic and all of that. Well, it seems that there could be a perception of micromanagement also in that sort of relationship. So how can you manage that tension or avoid that issue and not be like the micromanaging boss in all of this? And what sort of reporting requirements do you find reporting do you find constructive and not micromanaging of your partners?
Okay. So being on the grant writer fundraiser side for many years, I appreciate this fact. And so I brought that into our approach at IGS. So I can speak for us. I know this isn't necessarily universally the experience of everyone, but I would say I agree. And so as we think about reporting at IGS Energy, it's about what's the data that we can gather to understand what impact are we having. It's not about a grade or a judgment or just onerous work on behalf of for a nonprofit that then just sits on a shelf someplace. So we utilize a tool called the Impact Genome Report. It's from an organization called Mission Measurement, and they're really focused on outcome standardization, but also creating efficiency for nonprofit organizations to be able to gather information, gather data about the impact that they're making and how that aligns towards outcomes that the grant partner cares about in a very efficient way. So this has really transformed the way we do reporting. We used to actually not do reporting because I was like, if I can't do it well and with purpose, I'm just not going to do it. So that's how we started. Then we wanted to be able to look at the grant work we were doing sort of from a portfolio standpoint to talk about the actual impact we're making in the world. And that's where the Impact Genome tool came in. But we provide technical assistance for our partners up front. It requires about an hour of investment on their part up front that Impact Genome works with them to establish. And then it's about an hour on the back end. And I'll put a link. I see a question coming through. I'll put a link to this tool. But that's the way we've approached it, that basically we want our reporting to be useful and purposeful and help us as a grant maker understand the impact without creating an onerous burden on our nonprofit partners.
Yeah, and I can attest to that when you and I worked together, it was before you had that standard, but the reporting requirements that we had were things that we wanted to talk about anyway. They were how Grid Alternatives was measuring progress towards our goals and our mission. And that was one of the things where we dovetailed really, really nicely, because upfront our goals matched each other, and you didn't ask us to report on anything that was extraneous to things that were front and center to the mission and things that we wanted to talk about anyway. So we go back to authenticity, I think. Savannah, anything to add?
just that I can really appreciate the question, and that it's so true that it can feel managey. And San Francisco Foundation is on our own journey to have it less micromanagey. We have 3 questions for our reporting right now, and our reporting can be done either conversationally or written. It's up to the grantee partner, but our 3 questions are: what would you like us to know about your work during the grant period? How would you describe your organization's success during the grant period and in terms of the changes you want to see in the Bay Area? And number 3, what else is important for us to know to better support you? And so we're definitely working on just distilling it down to not the nice to know information, but just really what does it look like to be on a learning journey with our grantee partners. And even so, even in implementing this new version of reporting that we have, there's definitely been challenges on the way, along the way. And it's just a very thorny, complicated issue about how we think about the impact of nonprofit partners, right? Like it's kind of a big thing, and we have a board, and all organizations do have a board that they feel accountable to. So it's, I think, both taking our board on this journey of like, what does impact look like, as well as our community, like the community is like, what is the San Francisco Foundation doing with housing? Like, why haven't we solved this? So I think it's all of us kind of going on a journey about what does impact of nonprofits actually look like. And I think the field is moving towards less micromanagey. There's obviously, Jen, like what you're describing sounds like a gold star, and hopefully we're all shifting that way.
Thank you. So we have just a little under 5 minutes before we just open it up for audience questions. And one of the things that I kind of want to get out of this conversation is books and media recommendations. I mean, the 2 of you obviously are really, really good at your jobs, and you're informed by staying current, and what I'm curious about is, do you have any books or other media that you want to recommend about philanthropy or about social causes or whatever it is that's informing your work?
Okay, I will just, the 2 that came to mind immediately, and I thought this is not good, I should change my answer, but I didn't change the answer in the time that I saw this question. The first one is the Nonprofit AF blog. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that, but a man named
Thumbs up
Drew,
for that one.
yes, is very short weekly newsletter in your inbox that helps me, I think, not be so myopic and narrow-minded, and like remember the full picture, the full context that the foundations and nonprofit sector. And then the other one is,
It's also very funny.
it's also very funny, and there's often photos of cute animals. So how could you go wrong? The other one is Winners Take All, the elite charade of changing the world, by Anand, I will probably mispronounce his name, Haradas. But that's, yes, that's the book. That I haven't made it all the way through, but so far I'm just like, yes, 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 as I'm reading that. So I like that one.
Yeah. I say double thumbs
Jen.
up.
Awesome.
Double thumbs up for Winners Take All. It's a great one. I think the other, I spend a lot of my time actually just trying to stay abreast of what's happening, not necessarily in philanthropy, but in the industry that we work with, in the space that we are making investments in. So in the energy justice space. And so I read a lot of blogs and news and publications there. But the other thing that we as a company spend a lot of time doing is just thinking about authentic leadership. And so making space and time to really show up in the best way possible. So there's a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, which is all about growth mindset. And I go back to that and the lessons I've learned in that a lot of times, many times. So that's a book that is top of mind as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Um, so it looks like we've got some questions that are that came in through the chat. A few of them that I missed, and I'm going to try to consolidate as many of them as possible, and I'm going to really make an effort for us to get through all of them. But we had a question for Savannah specifically, and there was just a request for you to dig in a little bit more into what grantees are have told us at the foundation that they want to see changed. Either, I guess we were talking about reporting at the time, so
Yeah.
what's some of the feedback that we're getting?
And yeah, in terms of reporting, I think Jen said it, but just being overly burdensome, overly long. I think I only started the foundation about 3 years ago, but prior, I think we had a longer written report requirement. And the reports were not used in a substantial way in terms of, strategy, like informing strategy or so that was something that we were hearing was like, we're putting in this work, we're writing these reports, and we're not really sure how you're using them. And internally, I think we were like, we're not really sure how we're using them either. So that's something that we heard and why we changed to a much shortened version of the report, which we call a check-in. We also heard that when we decided to do the option to have a conversation or written check-ins or reports, not everyone wanted to do a conversation. We think we're busy. People on the ground, our nonprofit partners, are really busy as well. And so some people wanted to copy paste reports that they had written for other funders. And so that's fine with us too. Those are the kind of the things that come to mind, like flexibility in how the information is reported, and then just being overly long and burdensome was the feedback.
Great. Jen, do you have anything to add to that experience or?
No.
Cool. So Chris asked a question about the importance of qualitative data in reports, and how important is it? How important should people focus on that in their reporting? I mean, I've got an answer to that, and I would say, well, it depends. Very much depends on the type of work that you're doing.
Yeah, I would say yes, and I think Savannah talked about this earlier. The role of storytelling in the work is very powerful, but it does not take the place of at all. It doesn't always take the place of quantitative data to help understand impact in a different way.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance, but it's not just qualitative data. But yeah, I think ideally there would be both, although, I say that, and then also I know that there's some proposals that are like 500 characters or something like that. And so I know some people are hearing that like, yeah, okay, but I have 500 characters to do both. So it's a balance. Maybe if you can't do both, it's hard to think of like what is the exact role of qualitative data other than it's a balance and it should be complementary to quantitative data, as quantitative data should be a complement to the qualitative.
I think that there's a Vule blog post about, how are you going to change the world in 500 characters or less? So we had another question from Parker about support that foundations can offer their grantees beyond the check. And I think Savannah and Jen, both of you have already touched on this a little bit. But maybe just a couple more examples of the types of collaboration that you can have with your grantee partners, in addition to to the grant, which is important also. But yeah, other creative ways that you've partnered with one another.
I can start.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. It's something that we think about a lot at our foundation, and I think also something that the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project, TBPP, has a lot of helpful resources about this as well. So I think one thing is connecting our grantees to other sources of funding. We're trying to create long-term relationships. We also know that sometimes it will be time to move a grantee partner off of our list. So making sure that they're in a sustainable place, whether that's like, as an organization or with the support of another foundation. So making those kind of like warm handoffs to other foundations that we know about. Another one is, and then kind of along with that too, sometimes we do host like funder briefings. If we see an organization that we think a lot of our funder colleagues would be interested in, we can host funder briefings that way. We can do like the volunteering, picking weeds if we're at a farm or something like that, like the people power. We can support organizations that way. We have a marketing and communications team. So sometimes it's about uplifting events that our grantee partners are putting on for our networks and communities. Those are the things that come to mind.
Yeah, I would echo many of those things. I think the other thing that I would say is over time, as a relationship unfolds, you find more of these opportunities. So for us, many of the partners that we started working with from like a purely grant dollar standpoint several years ago, we're now building to say, oh, and what can we do from a policy standpoint together? What can we do from a co-marketing standpoint together? But I think the thing that I do emphasize is like usually those types of things take time, and they unfold over several years. It's not like out of the gate we don't get there. We typically like to get into a relationship and a partnership and test it and say, hey, do we see potential for this to grow, rather than all things at once kind of out of the gate.
That makes sense. So we had another question from Mark. It feels like a very, very specific question about the relationship between United Way and which is a fiduciary partner of the organization. But what I want to get out of this and turn it into a more general question, because I think that this is what you're getting at, is what are some ways that an organization can distinguish itself, even if when it's closely aligned with, say, another organization, either an organization that's either a broader part of a network or a parent organization or something like that. What are some tips that you can offer people for how to distinguish their organizations and what they're doing from similar organizations?
I mean, I think we've worked with organizations that have fiduciary partners or fiscal agents. We actually have worked with organizations who have United Way as their fiscal agent. And typically, like, they just operate as themselves. And then it's sort of more of a footnote, or, kind of later, like, oh, by the way, United Way is our fiscal agent. And so I guess, Mark, that might be something that you could think about doing, is not necessarily leading with, hey, we're United Way fiscal agent or fiscal partner, but leading more with the cause. And then it just so happens that the fact that United Way is your fiscal agent is more of a technical, like it's just more of a technical matter after the fact.
Yeah, that seems like good advice, Jen. I'm reminded of an organization that I was on a call with who lost their fiscal sponsor, and they had to have a new fiscal sponsor. And so in some ways, they were like an organization that had been around for almost 30 years, but losing this fiscal sponsor, and now the executive director has to do fundraising, which she had never had to do before. It felt like they were doing very like brand new organization kind of things. And so the advice in that situation was like, well, lift up the stuff that's relevant. Like, your situation is a little bit complicated, but if the relevant part is that you feel like a new organization and you need new organization supports, lift that up, and then, we'll understand the complexity later. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
That's very good advice. I mean, focus on what's relevant and what sets you apart and what makes your work unique and well, at the end of the day, indispensable to the communities that you serve. I think that absolutely makes sense. So we're getting close to 1:15, and I think that what I want to end with is just really tap into your wisdom and experience, and see what sort of advice you want to share with with grant writers and development directors and folks like that. You know, what sort of advice would you like to offer?
I'll say just very briefly, this isn't really a piece of advice or my comment is that, you know, fundraising professionals and to an extent, folks that are in the foundation world, on the other side, we're in a very hard situation. Like nonprofits do not have enough money to do the things that they want to be doing. And we also feel constrained. We wish that we had more money to give out. And so I just want to like uplift and recognize that like it's not the nonprofit industrial complex is like not a super fun place to be all the time. And so it's not something that I want you to know about my job. Like, I just want you to know that about like, this is the system that we're operating in and it's not perfect. And it quite honestly sucks sometimes because we have limited resources. And, you know, there's a whole conversation about how limited they are and whether it should be less limited that I think is very valid. But in terms of like how to stand out and all of these things, I just definitely appreciate the context that, you know, we're fighting for limited dollars. And that, you know, I wish there was a world where we were not, you know, having to spend so much time about how to stand out, because I'm sure all of the organizations that you're working for are doing amazing things and they deserve all of the funding. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, that's a great, I mean, I don't know, Carlo, if I need to say anything else, that was a wonderful way to to cap us off.
Well, I think that one of the things that, from at least my experience with you, is that there's also space. Savannah, what you mentioned was there's a space of competition, and that we wish that we could move beyond that. And Jen, I know that you have some experience in terms of the promise of collaboration. And are there any spaces or any experiences too that could serve as like a kernel for advice for folks who are on the call?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, Carlo. I think that one of the things that we see our roles as a grant maker is to be to try to take a systems approach and look for connections. And we've had a lot of success. And fortunately, we have nonprofit partners who are very interested in collaboration, even though we know they have limited time and limited resources, and all of that collaboration does take time. But it's resulted in some really powerful things. So I think that's being open to conversations and exploring things that don't necessarily, that may seem ambiguous or unclear at first, but that might potentially lead to opportunities for collaboration. I mean, in our case, with the Solar Workforce Training Center that I mentioned, that's brought together like 3 different organizations in Central Ohio that are collaborating on that. We're funding all of, you know, we're basically funding all of that for all 3 of them now. But it wouldn't have happened if they weren't willing to collaborate and look at how they solve a problem together, if they were kind of trying to approach it on their own.
Thanks, Jen. So on that really positive note, what I would like to do is, Destiana, I'd like to invite you back to close us out.
I'm so glad that we all had this time together, and students in our program will be inviting our panelists back to the class in just a few minutes, so we'll get to talk a little bit more. And to the public that's here, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great session.